But first, before we start, this is important. Somebody might have left a parking pass, a parking ticket in the bathroom. If that's you, just find me afterwards. Can you hear me? Can that? Okay, so the other thing, I don't know, is anybody here for the first time at a Women Who Code event and haven't been to something before? Okay, awesome. So, little introduction. Basically, we're an international group. I think we're in 13 or 14 countries. We have over 14,000 members. We're actually the 4th largest group in Women Who Code, so that's kind of exciting. Yeah. So I have this t-shirt. This is sweet, right? You can actually buy it online. We have the Twitter, we'll post it on Twitter. It's like a booster sale. For $25. I'm pretty sure it's the exact same shirt. The tint might be a little bit different. Okay, yeah. But it's sweet. It's a nice shirt. I like it. Okay, so other logistics. So what we do, there's a few of us who are organizers. Before there, Katie's over there. Helen might be coming. Lauren might be coming as well. You guys can talk to us afterwards if you have ideas. We do Java and JavaScript study groups. We also do things like brunches. I love brunch. I never get to go, so we go together. We also do code and coffees with DC Femtech, so that's kind of like the larger organization of all women in tech, so those are really fun. There's one this weekend, so definitely check them out. We want to host more study groups too, so if you guys have ideas for where we should have them hosted, we need help with sponsors. So either find us afterwards or shoot us an email, but it'd be really cool to do things like mobile or Ruby or something along those lines. Definitely let us know. Okay, so I think that's all I had to remind you guys about. What this event actually is, you saw Hello World to Hello Job. Obviously we're going to talk about what these girls have done to teach themselves to code, and they're now all professional developers. It's actually really awesome. I mean, I know them all personally, but beyond just like they taught themselves to code, I have a computer science degree and I'm constantly impressed by them. Like, Natasha can like crush me in code pretty much any day. It's actually, I'm sad all the time. But I try to myself, it's okay. So there's some really awesome people here. Kristen's been doing it for a long time, has a ton of experience, and Amy's like brilliant, actually brilliant. So you'll hear their stories. I don't want to take their thunder, but that's basically what we'll be talking about. We have some prepared questions, but if at the end you have questions, you can ask them. A little pro tip, I don't know if this will work for anybody else. When I'm at panels, I like write down my questions as it goes on my phone. So if that works for anybody else, because I always forget them by the end. Just checking. So anyway, without further ado, do you guys kind of want to introduce yourself, say what you've done, and kind of what got you to this job today?
Hi, my name is Amy. I used to be a pharmaceutical chemist. I basically majored in chemistry because that was the least boring subject to me. I graduated, I started doing research, and I had never taken a coding class before. I had never considered it, and I just found myself in my job being like, this is okay, but you know, it's not what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I went to the MIT website because I heard they had really cool like physics lectures and stuff, and their most popular course was Intro to Computer Science. I said, okay, well, I'll give it a shot. And I was hooked. I spent more time trying to figure out problem sets at my job than I spent doing my job. And so I went to Dev Bootcamp. I applied, it was when Dev Bootcamp had just started. None of the other ones existed yet. And then after that, I came back here. And I now work at a genetic testing company in Maryland called GeneDx. And I write software, internal software for all of the scientists there to manage all their data.
Hi, I'm Kristen. I'm a senior iOS developer at APQA, and those are my girls. I started coding when I was in college. I started writing websites with a fantastic program called Front Page, which I hope most of you have not heard of because it's awful. I kind of started that as like an interest, like I just needed something to do and wanted to play with it. And after college, I got into kiosks and mobile installation type stuff, so touch screens before there were really many touch screens. And then about 4 years ago, made the move to mobile apps. So I've been doing that for a little while, and I'm pretty much entirely self-taught. So.
Hi everyone, I'm Natasha, and I think in college I was actually a psychology major, And when I started my first job, I was actually working in the government here in DC. I knew that's not what I wanted to do. There wasn't the right spot for me. So I ended up moving out to San Francisco, getting another analyst type of job. And eventually I noticed, like, okay, there's lots of spreadsheets, and I think that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. And in San Francisco, there's a big tech community and startup community, so I got involved. And eventually I was like, okay, maybe I can try this coding thing. So I did a weekend workshop about Ruby on Rails, and actually at the end of the workshop, I was like, I'm not smart enough to do this. Like, I cannot be a coder. Because I think it's, or like for me, like in school you always get a little bit better, you know, as you keep learning, but so I blamed the workshop, not understanding what happened at the workshop, to myself, and just saying, okay, I didn't, you know, I'm just not smart enough for this. And then I basically was, you know, moved on, and maybe like 3 months later, I saw an article about a Stanford course that's similar to the MIT one that Amy mentioned. So I started, I was like, okay, I guess I can take a look, it won't hurt. And the professor in that class was just incredible. So immediately I was like, okay, this actually resonates with my learning style, so it wasn't me, you know, it was just the class I took wasn't good. And then I posted a blog post on Women 2.0, which is kind of like a women in tech blog, and said, you know, I'm going to be learning to code, does anyone want to do it? And there were 45 women who were like, I want to learn to code. Well, since I was starting out, there were basically, I think about 50% people dropped off just installing the Eclipse in Java. And unfortunately, I couldn't help them because I was new. I had a friend kind of help me one time, and a lot of people had, you know, Windows laptops and a Mac. I didn't know. Yeah, I couldn't really lead this group, but I think it gave me a sense of responsibility being the leader of the group. Where, like, when I wanted to quit, like, all the time, to be like, well, I guess I'm supposed to be doing this. By the end of it, it was just me, and actually this guy ended up joining the group, and he was like, look, I'm not going to hit on anyone, I'm just interested in, like, learning to code. So by the end of it, I also started my blog. So at first, I nobody read my blog, and then kind of at the point where most people dropped off, and that started off being my motivation, being like, okay, I'm the leader of this group, I have to like keep going. By the end of it, it was like, oh, people are kind of looking at my blog, so that was served as encouragement to, like, you know, but I think I've definitely given up like a few weeks at a time, or just being frustrated, but you know, kept going, and then eventually I saw the boot camp, and it was the very like second class of it, so I joined that and went from there.
All right, so you guys kind of hit on how you started, and you might have touched on this more, but maybe elaborate. A lot of people, it's like the real hot topic right now is let's learn to code. And so that's kind of easy. People are like, I'm going to do this, and you get started, but then you kind of fall off after a bit of time. And I think that happens to a lot of people, whether it's coding or whether it's like, I'm trying to learn Italian like, I don't know, 7 times, 8 times, go to the gym, don't even try. But so what did you do to kind of keep with it long term? Not just when you were started, but also kind of after. You always have to keep learning in this industry.
So for me, part of what kept me engaged was just the really interesting problems, the problem sets. I would just obsess over it all day. I'm like, okay, how do I solve this now? I also had a good friend from college who was a developer at the time, and she had just written a blog post saying it's not too late to learn how to code. Basically saying that of the 4 years she spent getting her degree, 2 of them were spent deciding what to major in. 1 of them was spent, you know, taking all the courses that she didn't use once she got a job. And so you can really catch up in a short amount of time, and people don't realize that. So that was very encouraging to me, and so it kind of inspired me to apply to a more structured program.
I guess I have a very different perspective because I started coding in 2000 something. So I started coding more out of like an interest hobby level, and I then kind of moved into, I went from chemistry major to an architecture major, and then finally wound up in a visual communications major because it was the only way I could graduate on time. which is pretty important to mom and dad. So my visual communications major actually allowed me to explore kind of online storytelling through a journalism program. And through that I started doing some basic development work, a lovely program called Flash that people think is evil, that at the time was also very fantastic. But the skills that I learned there kind of led me to search out for opportunities, internships, things like that, where those skills would be put to use. And all of those opportunities kind of pushed me to pursue that career field. And I think at the time it was a little bit different. There weren't really these kinds of groups. The Google didn't exist really yet, so you couldn't go searching for help. It was all book-based. But since then, it's been really interesting. I've gone through iterations of learning probably 4 or 5 different languages now. I still use a lot of different languages for tools and things like that. And I think what really motivates me is that I've reached a point now where I want to make everything about my projects and my process easier. So while I can become very, very good at one skill set, I also find all these ancillary skills, things like Ruby or a million things like Node.js, things like that, that are not part of what I do on a daily basis with iOS development, actually become very big skill sets. So I find side projects or tools that I need internally, and I take the time to work on those. And because those kind of make me feel good about getting somewhere, they kind of keep me motivated, and then I kind of want to move on and I want to keep doing things because then you feel like you get something for the effort you're putting in. So I think that's kind of
For me, I think I mentioned some of the things, which was kind of having a community or having that outside social pressure of, hey, I'm leading a group. And also wanted to mention when I was starting out, Women Who Code in San Francisco just started out. It was the first chapter, so I definitely went to like a lightning talk there, and that's helped me a lot to just have that group to go to. I remember I was doing like a Twitter app project, like a website, and there was a meetup at Twitter headquarters, and I got to go and like ask about API help. So just having a community has been really helpful. But also, so I just want to say that when I was starting out, I never thought this would be like my career. It was kind of more out of necessity almost, because in San Francisco there's so many startups and people building stuff, and it's so exciting. And I just have like I just hated that I can't even move a link on a page. So I knew that whatever field I wanted to get into next, whether it was like marketing or maybe community manager or like, I don't know, just pretty much any field, I need to be able to talk to developers. So it started out as that, but then I think the first year I didn't even really like it. That's really hard and painful. And then I know like that, halfway through the end of the boot camp, like that boot camp, I was like, oh, I kind of like it and kind of understand what's going on. And now I'm kind of at a point where like I love it. And the reason I love it is mostly, which because I thought of coding as kind of like this, guy sits in a cubicle, like I can go sit in a cubicle somewhere else and do something else, like, it's not a big deal. But just the amount of creativity that it has brought out of me has been incredible. So I kind of grew up more as a kind of math person, so I never thought of coding as a creative thing, but there's so much exciting stuff. You have to think about like user experience and marketing your app and creating the app and communication across different teams and different people. I think I'm more of a generalist, so I like a lot of skill sets, and coding allows me to kind of have that and also, really do what I love, which was surprising.
So one of the things, if you do start coding and you've been doing it for a while and you're like, I like this, I know I want to do it, how would you guys suggest going about getting your first job? Because I know this is something I'm really focused on. Like it's great to code, but like eventually you're going to want to make some money. But I don't have that personal experience because I just went out of college with a CS degree. So how would you suggest going about that if you don't have something like a degree on your resume?
For me, I guess one of the things that helped me was that I had a background in science. So when I applied to jobs, I had a leg up on other coders who were applying to my company, which is a genetic testing company, because I knew a lot of the science that went into it. But I mean, I applied to so many different jobs, and part of it is just luck. You know, sometimes people like you, sometimes they don't, and you just have to keep going until you find one that does, and make sure that you like them too. But yeah, especially for people who are changing careers, I think it helps to leverage some background that you might already have.
I have two kind of big thoughts on this. One is that I, again, started this a long time ago, but I have two awesome women that are also developers in my office, and it's, to be honest, the first place I've ever worked where there are other women developers, so it's amazing. All three of us come from non-computer science backgrounds, and my background is a little bit different, but both of them also went through a program that was here in DC. It's no longer around, but they went through a program here to learn, and then they took internships, and all three of us have gone through a process of going through internships. And you know, there's definitely a fear of internships. Most of them aren't paid, or if they are paid, you're literally like scraping pennies, eating ramen. Like, I mean, my first job was, they do $10 for $10 lean cuisines on Sunday night at Safeway. I knew all about that. So I moved up to DC on a whim with an internship job, got a side job. I was working every day of the week until 11 o'clock at night. I would go home, I would shower. I slept on my friend's couch for those 3 months before I got a job. And internships offer you so much opportunity. There is so much you can learn in a school program. You can read a book, you can watch webinars, whichever way you learn best. But there is so much that you will learn from the people you're working with and from being on the job that you cannot learn in a classroom or from a book. And those internship opportunities really do open up doors. So definitely don't discount an internship opportunity, especially if you find one at a superb company. You will learn more from that internship, even though it takes you 6 months to get your first job. Then you will learn going to some smaller company that doesn't really have industry experience, where there aren't people for you to learn from. So definitely don't discount the internship opportunity. And just kind of stay motivated on what you're interested in, and keep learning and keep focusing on what you want to do, and don't be scared to take the risks that you have to take to get there.
For me, the biggest thing has been kind of being able to market myself, and I think that's like, if you don't come from so it's mostly like leveraging skills that you already have to get the first job. So for me, like, my blog has been invaluable because I've been showing off. So I like to be very honest. So I post everything on my blog, and I say, this is probably not the best solution, but that's how I think about it. And I post all my code on GitHub, and again, like, if I look back on my code from when I was starting to code, I'd be like, I don't think I could look at it. It'll probably be embarrassing, but just really leveraging, like, we do live in that. You can use Twitter, GitHub, you can start, looking up to Stack Overflow, so you can really leverage and build yourself to stand out, because one thing, I think one mentality shift is when you're looking for a job, you're like, okay, I'm not invaluable because I'm just starting out. But to the companies, it's really valuable to have, they want to be cool. So that's just something, that's the perspective to think about. They're like, wow, if you're, for me, like, your blog, and we want to look cool, so we want to be associated with you, and they really want a good story. So if you make that a good story for them, that, hey, we hired someone who's learning to code, and she has this blog, that makes it look good. And then finally, just, again, like, be honest and be yourself. So I'm a very kind of like obsessive coder, which is not, so like, I like to follow best practices and follow the rules when I'm coding, which is like, it's whatever your skill set is, and this is just, it's whatever you're passionate about, and for me, that's something I'm passionate about. So during the boot camp, we had like an interview day, and I got a job which I did not expect, but because the founder of the startup was impressed that I took 5 lines of code, and then I refactored to 1 line of code, because that's what I've been doing during the boot camp. Other people moved really fast, and they went to there'd be like a number 7 out of 10 assignment, and I'll be like a number 2, but I'll be working with the other guy who's obsessive with coding, and like make him tell me exactly like how to do it the right way, which is just something I'm passionate about, but figure out what is that spark that you already have that you can bring to the table and leverage that and find other people who are similar and then work with them.
I do a ton of technical recruiting, so kind of along those lines, I just wanted to mention, don't undervalue, they've all said it, but don't undervalue your diversity and what you can kind of bring to the table. Even if it's not like I'm an expert programmer, you might have that background in marketing, in advertising, or you might be like the end user of their app, and if it's a team of all guys and it's like anything related to purchasing, women make 80% of purchases. I mean, quite literally though. Women make 80% of those purchases. So if it's anything related to that, you can speak to that in a much better level than those people. So I know like it might seem weird recruiting, or like if you talk to a recruiter that's a jerk, like don't let that get to you, because not everybody's like that. But so you mentioned, Kristen, you kind of touched on this, taking risks. I know some of you have also taken other risks, but elaborate on that and also kind of talk to like what gave you the courage to kind of have those jumps, because I know doing an internship that you might not be making a lot of money and you're sleeping on somebody's couch is really scary, so kind of just more elaboration along those lines.
I think, I don't know if I have that much to say on this. I had a strong safety net, like you can always go back and live with your parents. So I figured, I can always fall back on something.
I'm trying to think of how to elaborate on that. I mean, I guess I took the risk early in my career, and it's very easy to take those risks, I think, earlier in your career than it is later. And I've had an interesting spell of jumping. Like I said, I started out mostly in Flash development, and clearly most of you probably don't even know what that means, and the others of you are like, yeah, Flash is now evil, and it should die. So, on that point, I think, the risk-taking is realize that you have a set of skills. Every single one of you in this room has a set of skills, whether you started programming or not. You have skills that you're bringing to the table outside of those coding skills, and use those skills to your advantage. I think the risks that I've taken have been, I'm going to change everything I know about programming and go a different route and learn to code for something else. So I've done Java, I've done Ruby, I've done Objective-C, I've done JavaScript, web development, I've done Flash development, and for me, it's reached a point where each step is a new challenge, and taking the step to iOS was a terrifying jump because it was leaving a safety net that I had, but it was also taking the risk I needed to take for my career. And we work in a great industry where those risks are actually kind of appreciated. Most of your bosses are going to encourage you to take risks, to learn new things. But don't be scared to try anything new. Just be willing to take that leap of faith and be like, I'm going to do this, and believe that you can do it, and just kind of step forward and commit to it. And I think once you've committed, it's kind of like Natasha said, if you truly commit to it, then you will take the effort that you have to take to get there. And just never discount yourself. Because really and truly, if you are here today, you have the motivation you need.
I've taken a lot of risks, and I don't know, I think at this point I live on risks, and if things are comfortable, I'm like, okay, should I be here? But yeah, when I started out, my first job, by the end of it, I wasn't happy, and I didn't know what I wanted to do next, and actually took a risk and quit before I had a job in San Francisco. So just going to San Francisco was a risk, and ended up working out, which was cool. But yeah, learning to code was a big risk because I decided to join the boot camp, and right now boot camps are more established. But it was the very second one. It was the of that class, and I've never heard of it, so I knew I had to do it as soon as I saw it. But I had to quit my job and go to this random boot camp that I knew nothing about and learn to code from there. And then and luckily it worked out, and I got a job doing Ruby on Rails, and then about 6 months into my Ruby on Rails job, my company was looking for iOS engineers, and at that point I was like, okay, I need that high of a risk maybe. Or I like to think of what am I scared of, and then try to do it. So I tried learning iOS development before, and it was very hard. And my company was looking for iOS developers, and I was like, okay, I think I kind of want to do it. I've always wanted to do it. I'm really scared. And I heard of the program called Mobile Makers, which just started also. I was in their second class, and they were doing iOS development boot camp. So I applied like without telling anyone, got in. Then I basically went to my boss and was like, hey, you guys said you're okay with Rails developers moving to iOS. I got into this boot camp, and at that point, there was another guy who was like a much more senior developer who also was interested in moving to the iOS team, but he basically went to my boss and was like, oh, I looked at a video once about it, and here I was like pretty much like willing to quit to go to this boot camp to learn iOS. So they actually ended up letting me go for 2 months to go learn, and ended up paying for the class. I still had to kind of go a little bit into debt and pay for living in Chicago and still paying my San Francisco rent. But like I came back, I joined the iOS team, and I love iOS, so it's like maybe at this point I've gotten so many rewards for the risks that I just keep taking them. But big reward, big risk. Like big risk, big reward, or you can fail. You don't know. It depends on your tolerance. So sure, yeah, there's definitely been hard times, but I'm really happy with my risks.
So you guys mentioned how, it's definitely easier to take a risk right after college or when you don't have a lot of responsibilities, but not everybody is at that time. So what would you suggest for people who are older or maybe do have families or some other responsibility or like a lot of college debt? What should they do to kind of help themselves?
Yeah, you start.
So again, like there's ways to mitigate your risk. So yeah, and I guess I made it sound maybe worse, but before going to the boot camp, I studied for a year on my own. So going into the boot camp, I already had a very strong foundation. So I was set up for success at the boot camp because I knew already, here's how I learned, here are my gaps in knowledge. So pretty much every week at the boot camp, I was learning new things, but I wasn't learning something brand new. Whereas people who went to the boot camp, or like some people who I've seen who just started, never looked at the programming, started the boot camp, and they're just struggling. Maybe by the end of it, they're like, oh, that's not how I learn. And you don't want to be in that position. So learning as much on your own, again, I've been learning for a year on my own. So that's, definitely you can do that. Another thing is once you so the other thing was also like, again, my blog and GitHub. So putting your brand out there. So I know like if I quit my job, there's people who I can show to my blog and they'll still hire me. So at this point, like in my career, I can actually take more risks because I know, because I built that brand for myself. I'm not a random person who's like kind of like off the street, nobody knows them, and now they're gonna ask you hard algorithm questions. But because I kind of have this blog and other things and code on GitHub, I can kind of get into jobs in the more backdoor, like, oh, I kind of know people or they know me, and the interview process ends up being easier.
Yeah, I think she definitely made a really good point. There are so many resources, at least for that first step of getting started, that you don't necessarily have to just like drop it all and go after it. So there are so many great online resources. Here in DC, there are evening resources where you can go to classes. I know General Assembly has started some of those programs, things like that, where you can kind of get your feet wet before you like dive wholehearted into something. And I think that's, really valuable to do that. And as far as, mitigating risk in terms of like where you are in your life, that can be really challenging in terms of having support from those around you, especially if you are a little bit further into your life career. So I think starting with okay, I want to get my feet wet, I'm going to experience what this is, what this means to me, and then kind of taking a leap of faith and investing in yourself with something first. Make yourself do a project and make yourself understand all of that. Find a mentor, somebody to work with. I think that's extremely valuable. I was lucky that my first couple jobs, I had a couple of people that I worked with that were just great to work with. And that makes a huge difference. And then kind of as you're at that step and you're starting to take all those risks, just ask for forgiveness later. That is still kind of one of the best ways to actually get things done and move on, is to like just do it and ask for forgiveness later. Because otherwise you end up in a roundabout circle talking about things and wondering, am I ever going to get there? And that's kind of how Natasha, she got into that program, because she just went and applied to it. And she asked later. I had the chance to go to Google I/O with some of these ladies this year. I didn't ask for permission to go. I requested a ticket, and then when I got a ticket, I went to my boss and said, hey, I got a ticket for this. Can I go? And like, I still had to kind of beg and plead a little bit. That's a kind of cheap conference, but I think that's like a really good life lesson, and that's part of the risk too, is kind of knowing when to take chances and when to just like push yourself a little bit more.
I think also when you're older, you have the opportunity. For me, I worked 5 years at a pharmaceutical company, so I was able to save a lot financially, and I think that helped a lot with mitigating the risk, is that I knew I had that buffer. And the other thing was, the opportunity cost of not taking the risk, right? Is that like I would still be there, just kind of happy, And it's kind of the idea of like, well, is it worth the risk to do it, or it's almost riskier not to do it and